A very warm welcome to all of you, scholars and readers of the Rising Asia Journal, which has just published an unprecedented and exclusive volume, guest edited by Professor Eric Henry of North Carolina. And the title of the translation is Plucked-Up Tales, Ancient Vietnamese Narratives, which Professor Henry has translated into English, which is also an unprecedented and epic and a major thing, because it's the first time that these ancient stories are coming out in translation in English for circulation across the world, soon to be published by an important American university press, with a due acknowledgement that these tales were first published in the Rising Asia Journal. Professor Eric Henry was born in 1943. He obtained a PhD in Chinese literature and at Yale University in 1979, and subsequently taught at Dartmouth from 1980 to 1982 and at the University of North Carolina from 1982 to 2011. He was employed as a freelance keyboard musician, a pianist of the classical kind, from 1961 to 1980, and served in the United States Army from 1968 to 1971. His Army service including a 1-year intensive course in Vietnamese at the Defense Language Institute at Fort Bliss, Texas, and a 1-year tour of duty in Vietnam 1970-71. His publications include Chinese Amusement, the lively plays of Li Yu, published by Archon Books in 1980, In Whose Eyes, a translation of the memoirs of the film director Chan Van Thuy, and The Garden of Eloquence, a bilingual version of a Han Chinese dynasty compendium of historical anecdotes. He has published many articles on early Chinese history and culture in the Harvard Journal of Asiatic Studies and other journals, and articles on Vietnamese literature and historical legends in Vietnam Forum, Crossroads, and the Michigan Quarterly. He is a guest editor of Rising Asia Journal. For the journal, he has translated The Creators of South Vietnam, At Home and Abroad, published in Volume 5, Issue 2, and Tales from the Principalities, Ancient Chinese Stories, Volume 5, Issue 3. He has been retired since 2011. With those brief words, I warmly once again extend a welcome to Professor Eric Henry and his wife Joan, as well as to all the readers of the Rising Asia Literary Circle and our president, Mr. Deb Mukherjee. And now I hand over proceedings to the anchor and curator of the Rising Asia Literary Circle, Professor Chaitali Maitra, to take the evening forward. Thank you so much for all coming.
Thank you, Harish. That was on point indeed. Warm welcome needed in North Carolina, and possibly a cooler one here in Kolkata, where we are hitting 40 degrees centigrade. Be that as it may, it is an enormous pleasure for me to welcome Professor Eric Henry and his lovely wife, Mrs. Henry, and all of you wonderful people who have traversed over puddles and ponds to once again come forth and discuss a completely new and unique set of stories from ancient Vietnam, short stories actually, and you will get to know more of this in a couple of minutes. I'm Banerjee Mehta, and it's my great pleasure to welcome our president of the Rising Asia Foundation and its other satellites, the Journal and the Literary Circle, We have our literary circle members here who will wax eloquent on these stories. But the fact that makes me really happy today is that we have Mr. Deb Mukherjee, our president of the foundation and the circle, who believes, as do we at the literary circle for years, that community building is very much a part of our diktat. And with the readership that we have garnered over the past few years, it's over to all of you, ladies and gentlemen, to take the floor and let's investigate what was at the heart of these ancient stories that still resonate with us.
This is very, very important. This initiative that you have taken from the literary circle, and of course also through your journal, I think is highly commendable. And let's have many more of such sessions. But thank you very much for inviting me to be part of it. I feel really honored and humbled. Thank you.
We are overwhelmed, as I said, that you're here, Mr. Mukherjee. And as you know, most of us on this Rising Asia Literary Circle have hung with each other since COVID years. Hello, Joan. This is Mrs. Henry. So a big shout out to her. She is absolutely lovely.
Oh, hello, madam. Good seeing you. Thank you.
Welcome, Orithro. Lovely to see you.
Yes, lovely to see you too.
Professor Henry, this is Aritra Sarkar of a very distinguished family of publishers of newspapers. But he's a great writer. He's a very good and short stories, fiction. So I'm so glad he's here. So what I think is marvelous is that all of us are here over puddles and ponds, and I think we'll get a few more in a little while. This group of readers, Professor Henry, is a very astute and driven group. As I have known them, I've had the privilege to know them for quite 5 years or more, maybe, and some for over 8 years. We do mainly fiction launches or a book discussion every month, and many of us have hung together since COVID, and this is, I think, all in all, a total of 62 books that we have navigated, and under Rising Asia, Anasuya and Anju and Chaitali will bear me out, I think. It's about 16 titles. So that's, that's a fair component of what we do. Before we go into the short stories, I think it would be the right thing to do to have Harish and Professor Henry in conversation. So we have a nice contextual background, and then it will be machine gun fire as our readers quickly sum up. Each one has a book that they're going to be unpackaging. And once that's done in about 2 to 3 minutes, each of us will ask a question of Professor Henry. Is that okay? Prof. Henry, is that okay? Okay. So Harish, go ahead and take it away.
Yes, so I think Professor Henry, Eric, we might take about 10 to 12 minutes in this little overview that we had planned. So, Professor Henry, how did you come upon these tales? How did you learn about them? How did you learn where they were, and what drew you to them?
Well, I have been aware of these tales almost throughout my whole life, and there had been times in the past where, for some purpose or another, I have made English versions for students. Sometimes I would give Vietnamese translations instead of English translation. It depended on the circumstances, and I have always been deeply drawn to these stories. I think the best way of getting to understand any culture is to study the traditional narratives coming from those cultures rather than histories which have to do with rulers and military campaigns, and one doesn't learn too much about the culture from such studies. So I'm rather, to be frank, I'm a little bit shocked that I'm the first one to provide English translations of the stories, because by rights this should have occurred more than 100 years ago. And I've been intending throughout my life to translate the stories, but I'm forgetful and lazy. But about a year ago, one of my friends reminded me about them, so I decided it would be now or never. So I went through all the stories, and I did about one story every day. And one of my Vietnamese friends, Mr. Ngo Vinh, was surprised that I had translated them so rapidly. So he asked me what my secret was, and I said to him, "Well, I will give a response to your question, but it will be in the style of the work itself, which of course emphasizes supernatural interventions in human lives." So I said, every night I have a dream in which a distinctive looking man in Trần Dynasty court regalia appears before me and says, "My name is Trần Thế Pháp, and I have been sent down here by the Lord on high to order you to translate such and such a story in Nam Chit Quai, and if you do not immediately obey, you'll be severely beaten." So I said that and terror at this communication, I would immediately try to translate the stories, but then meet with difficulties so that my progress was slowed and I would be in near despair. But then upon waking up, I would see the completed translation lying on my bed. So I thought this was a perfectly rational explanation, but my friend made no response.
So, Professor Henry, each of these short stories mentions that the authors are unknown. Could you go a little bit into the fact that why are they unknown, or were they never there? Were they never claimed by anyone? Did no one ever put a byline to them?
Well, I have been corresponding sometimes almost every day with a Hanoi scholar named Nguyen Huệ Chi, and he is an expert in this problem, and he has made a careful study of all of the extant hand manuscripts of this collection of stories, and I think he has just about proven that they date from, let's say, the year 1380, give or take 1 or 2 years. They were first collected and written down near the end of the Trần Dynasty, and a number of old sources agree that the collector, compiler, perhaps the author of those stories was President Heifat. In Mandarin Chinese, that name would be Chen Shifa. And well, we do not have any manuscripts that actually date for the end of the trend. The earliest ones were published early in the Lei dynasty in 1404 and 1405. And we know the names of the editors of those early Lei editions. However, those two editors, neither one knew of the existence of the other editor. And the editions appeared only 1 year apart. However, there is a very important area of agreement between them. They list the names of the stories in the collection. And this list agrees entirely, though they didn't know each other. So I think that demonstrates that in 1404 and 1405, there was a manuscript that had essentially the stories that we know of today, and that there's every likelihood that there was a court scholar named that made the collection around 1380.
Right. So I think I can just ask you two short questions and ask you to give shorter responses. Uh, why are Confucian practices absent in these 41 tales, given that China had a hegemonic influence over these Vietnamese principalities at the time? And was it a sort of rejection by the authors of these stories of Chinese hegemony? And
Well,
and a second question attached to this is: do these 41 stories carry any evidence of Vietnamese clan or Vietnamese or those little principalities of people of Vietnam as such, those little principalities? Was there any evidence of their resistance to Chinese authority? Thank you. So there are these two together, I think.
I myself was very astonished to not see any evidence of Confucian influence in these stories. It's very difficult to pick out any Confucian idea or motif from these stories. The characters in them are full of desire for achievement, but they do not desire to be good. They do not desire to be proper. They desire to be powerful. They want to be masters of magical techniques which will allow them to rise to positions of supremacy. Now, Vietnam is often said to have been a Confucian culture, but that would be impossible to prove from this collection. And then Confucianism became more prominent during the Lei dynasty and the subsequent Nguyen dynasty in Vietnam.
Right. And is there any evidence of any resistance by these clans of the
Well,
people of the South?
I think there is some evidence in the sense that many stories appear to negate things that are advocated by the ideology of China. For example, according to Chinese thinking, when you contract a marriage with another person, you make use of a go-between. And there are a set of stipulations about how this kind of thing must occur. But one of the stories in Litnam Chitkwai is goes against that, and in a way, well, I would say it violently goes against that. A pair of desperately poor people, a father and a son, get along by fishing, and they're so poor that they share between them only a single item of clothing. It is a cod piece to cover their shame. And depending on their activities, one or the other may make use of it. But anyway, the story goes on to describe a marriage that occurs between a princess and the young man, who accidentally see each other unclothed. And the princess interprets this as a sign from heaven and demands that she become the wife of the naked young man. It is impossible to imagine anything more insistently un-Chinese than that story.
Thank you very much, Professor, for that little overview of things. And now over to Julie and the various readers who want to come forward and ask you some other kinds of questions.
Okay.
Thank you, Harish. Okay, we're changing gears a little bit. Now we are on to the actual meat and potatoes.
Mm-hmm.
And using magic to overcome adversity in origin myths.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we are homing into, the title of the collection. Now, I will not come in here and give my view on the stories, because the stories are legendary, they are unforgettable, because like all myths of origin, what I find is, if you go back to the same period, Professor Henry, in the Cambodian myth of Kondenya, there is
Mm-hmm.
always this desire element between a man and a woman from different spaces, different cultures, to come together and start something new. And
Mm-hmm.
that starting something new is what fascinates me, whether it is folk tales, whether it is tales that we hear which have been passed on um, in our yatras, jatras, which is performative texts. It could be the epics, it could just be stories from certain communities of which have all ancient cultures, I think. And if we are salaming Gabriel Garcia Marquez for magical realism, I think the father of all magical realism is your short stories. Now, orality, I think, is something that interests a lot of us. And my question to you would be that, unlike the dominant nations which have ruled the world, the Western classics that we know of, um, those were written, documented in many ways. Our stories in Asia, which go back sometimes to Indic origins of the Ramayana or the Mahabharata, are mostly Shruti, what you hear from generation to generation,
Mm-hmm.
orality. So, are these stories then, Professor Henry, would they have had an oral history kind of component right in the beginning?
Well, I believe that would be true, but I cannot say anything that will prove that. I am currently looking at a 2-volume, 1,800-page collection of Vietnamese folk tales compiled in the last century by Nguyen Dong Chi. And this is a monumental collection, and many of the recorded stories end with a section called variants that describe all the slight differences from region to region in the way those stories are recounted. So certainly, a great deal of oral storytelling does go on in Vietnam, and
Right.
So I hope to discover more evidence of this as I go through this collection.
Superb. Thank you so much for opening the floor, and pointing us in the direction that those were really different days. I think book one, Madhulika Haitan has very kindly agreed to open the floor on that. So Madhu, go right ahead and uh, talk a little bit about what you felt about it, and then shoot your question to Professor Henry.
Mm-hmm. What do you
Hello,
hear that?
Dr. Henry.
Mm.
So when I read these 4 stories from part one, it's sort of a name formed in my head that these are mythic tales of the kingdom of Vietnam and its people, but 4 stories in their own light. And there are some responses that came to my mind. I've just jotted them down in point form. Please allow me to read them. Number one, age-old stories run through a landscape of spectacular victories, grand or obscure origins, and live off the wealth of myths. 2. They feed on the larger-than-lifeness of contradictory human emotions and the creation and resolution of boundaries. 3. Often, they suggest that within the shackles of being human, man cannot give in to desire or to what arises from unmitigated desire, such as the need for unmitigated justice, the desire to be ruled by the virtuous, or even the desire to covet another's partner. And then magic steps in, creating creatures and superhumans who do give in, who, for expedient or inexplicable reasons, do not need to justify their behavior at that time. In effect, these stories very often tell us that the end justifies the means. 4. The extreme rationality of our times has led this magic to the very brink of extinction. Yet fantasy, mythology, enchanted beings draw us towards a hidden country, a country of imagination that is unique, that is ours, that is in us. As long as we allow this imagination to remain so, with all its food for flight, extinction is not an option. 5. We live in lands of fabulous beasts. Extraordinary life forms look back at us from monuments, temples, churches, even homes. In India, they're embedded in our very psyche. Creatures that hold up the world, that destroy the world, creatures who are half human, half animal, even partly or wholly God. Always supernatural, always magical, bordering the ordered world, challenging its fixity. 6. Strangely, today's 4 stories feature no such creatures. The antagonists here are all too human. These stories, as I've thought earlier, live in their own light. 7. All non-human fantastical beings exist not in the physical world, but in the otherworldly realms that permeate it. These realms overlap at points where time and space interface with timeless space. 8. Today, most of us skirt by the borders of these two worlds. But there are those with imaginations who still repurpose mythical beings for our times. In a technologically changing world where everything seems possible, anything is possible. We are still part of a sacred communion with the story spirits of yore. Am I right, Professor Henry?
Well, yes, you are right, but you speak from an experience of traditions that I do not have. Um, I think in the series of part one, the one that is known to all Vietnamese is about the origin of the Vietnamese people brought about by the union of Lac Long Quan and
Yes.
Oka. And what strikes me about the story is that Vietnamese historical legend, the story of the origin of the Vietnamese people begins with a divorce. Lac Long Quan and
Yes.
they
Yes. And his wife, Oko.
they
Yes.
decide that their natures are too incompatible for them to.
Yes.
So Lac Long Quan takes half of their offspring down to the ocean, and Oka
Mm.
brings the other half up to the mountains. Lac Long Quan is an ocean creature, and Oka is a mountain creature.
Yeah.
And that, if you travel to Vietnam, that in fact is what you see almost all the time. Almost every
Yes.
landscape is a mixture of ocean and
And
mountains,
mountains.
often very close.
Yeah.
And well, mm, I'm trying to think about interactions with animals or non-human beings. The one that occurs to me is a huge, menacing snake that
Which comes
characters
out of the waters.
and, the snake has a growth near his mouth, and the hero is able to rescue himself because he has a magic
Mm.
talisman that will cure people of such growth, which is a service that he performs for the snake. Um, I have a Vietnamese friend who claims that this story is of Chinese origin, but I personally fail to see that. I can't imagine any story more essentially Vietnamese than that one. That's all that occurs to me on this point.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor.
I thought that in our stories from the second part of the Jatakas in Buddhism, we also have this amalgam of creatures of the land and creatures of the sea, which
Mm-hmm.
I think Cambodian sculpture does a great job of with the serpent, the seven-headed naga. But they were, I don't know, but it is the geography and the geology of the land, I think, also, Professor, that determines this constant wrestling between land and water in
Mm-hmm.
so many ways, right? So book two, Anasuya, looking greatly forward. um, it's on historical legends, and you have a very interesting take on it, which we are dying to hear. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Julie, and good morning, Professor Henry. I think in your part of the land it is the morning. And congratulations again on this fabulous translations. And the first thing that I noticed as I was reading are the illustrations. They are really very fabulously illustrated. There are three stories which have illustrations in my book, and it very nicely encapsulates the theme of the story, because the stories are small and quite in the way they've been worded. The picture kind of adds more flesh to the story. That's one. And while I was, quite curiously informed about statecraft in those times, diplomacy, and the way, uh, expansionist tendencies of men, how they uh, played out. It's not too different from how things are today. And perhaps all these things keep repeating themselves. The only things that change along the way are the techniques and the technological improvements that come along. But basic human proclivities are perhaps the same. One of the stories that actually finally kind of hit me in the middle of I was Mayan retake in Vietnam. Now, this story is dated at, according to the translation, 14th century CE. So, looking at something which is in these times, in this set of centuries. However, the run took place in India in 5000 BC. So, given the similarity in every one of the participants. There's a kidnapped prince's wife. There's a war over sea. There are monkeys in the army. So it took me to the 2022 Nobel Prize for Physics, which was given for the concept that we are perhaps living in a simulated reality. So the same kind of a program with the same players are playing out in different coordinates in the time-space fabric. One played out in 5000 BC, one perhaps played out in the 14th century BC. So I'd like your thoughts on this. I mean, did it even cross your mind to think along these lines?
Uh, well, I believe that the stories in Lytton Chitkwai could not have come into being if it had not been for the influence of stories and values from India. I think it's also true to say that they could never have existed without an input that came from China. But there, the relationship is often sharply antagonistic. I'm not sure about these Indic influences. I was chatting with Harish recently when I first became acquainted with Vietnamese music. I was struck by the ability of Vietnamese singers to ornament melodies in a microtonal fashion. Um, Singers from China and Korea and Japan do not do that. Only singers from Vietnam. And I suspect, well, I know that the influence on Vietnamese music of Cham singers has been very great. And I think both the typical cosmic melancholy Vietnamese songs and also the microtonal ornamentation has a great deal to do with the influence of Cham people who originally worshipped the gods of Hinduism. I mean, historically, that's the way it was. Since then, they have all turned into Muslims.
Thank you.
I'm not sure this answers your question very well. That's what occurs to me.
No, it's not. Yeah, it's a little different.
It
Yeah, but
wasn't.
thank you nevertheless. It was very interesting the way you explained it through the music with which that was the vehicle of transmission of the story. And I think that explained the context.
Exactly. And Anna, I think the fact that Professor Henry has that extraordinary musical background where he himself
Music
is,
background, right?
yeah,
Yes.
that it adds to the way he can uh, negotiate the question which you asked. But
Well,
I think that,
Yes. And
sorry,
it's a perspective, definitely.
yeah, yes, Prof. Please go ahead, Professor.
yeah, well, I can say that it was Vietnamese singing. That was the road that led me into the culture. Mm.
Okay, let's jump on to book three. As you can see, when you're listening to someone like Professor Henry and all our machinations on the stories, time does fly. So let's keep a track of it. Chaitali, book three, Suppressing Monsters and Spirits. Professor Chaitali Maitra. You're here,
Good
right? Yes.
morning, Professor. Yes. Good morning, Professor. It's
Good
my
morning.
privilege to be able to talk to you. Thanks, Julie Dee. Thanks, Harish. So, I've been reading the third book of Plucked-Up Tales, and in this book, there are 7 tales, and the first 3 are on monsters, and the next 4 are not on monsters. They are on man trying to control landscape and tackling elemental aspects of landscape. So the conclusions are not the same. And as you keep reading, you plunge into questions which are deeper to your culture, to your consciousness. And that will be different for every part of the world, I guess. Now, my question to you is that what is your take, Professor, on man's inability to control the spirits and also to control his destiny? What would you talk about it?
Well, certainly there are many indications in the stories of the helplessness of human beings when it comes to controlling the world, when it comes to overcoming challenges. But at the same time, these stories show remarkable confidence that there are techniques, there are ways of suppressing challenges and evil and attaining what you desire. For example, the third story in that section begins with an existential problem. There is a tree spirit who has to be propitiated once every year with the offering of a human being to be used as a sacrifice. So what can be done to overcome that adverse circumstance? Well, you hire a widely traveled and very knowledgeable and quite elderly magician who organizes an immense public spectacle involving acrobatics and people flying through the air and yet not colliding with each other. And this spectacle is so amazing that it causes the bad tree spirit to draw near so as to get a closer look, and that allows somebody to kill him dead with a sword thrust. Um, well, in all of these stories, in section 3, means are sought. I think almost all of them, supernatural means, are sought and used often successfully to eliminate the threat. I think, you know, all of the stories are filled with supernatural elements of this sort.
Yes.
Vietnam is not alone in this. I have also translated an early 3rd century BC Chinese work that are full of tales, and it is evident that one of the prime areas of interest in the people who wrote these tales was the influence of spirits and other supernatural elements in human life. But that was China in the 4th century BC. China changed in the centuries that followed, and they became much more rationalistic. And there was a Tang Dynasty scholar who wrote a whole book criticizing everything that he found misleading or preposterous in this ancient text. And what he writes is very interesting. But the problem is, if you accept his criticisms and decide to eliminate everything supernatural in this ancient collection, the tales cease to be tales. They cease to have any reason for existing.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor. Thank you.
So, Swati Jha, looking forward to your reading of Homegrown Conquerors, Rulers, and Resistance.
Yes, hello, Professor. Good morning, and a very good evening to all of you. I really think that this is a treasure trove of material to reconstruct the history of Vietnam as never before. I'm completely, absolutely smitten by what I've read. And as the title suggests, the homegrown conquerors, resistance fighters, it means it contains 3 stories, and all 3 of these stories deal with the resistance offered by the local Vietnamese to the Chinese domination. How they have made their own small principalities, offering resistance to the Chinese, and all 3 stories deal in some way or the other with this theme. So I would like to congratulate Professor Henry that he has, from within its cultural imagination of Vietnam, he has explained Vietnam from within its cultural imagination, and not relied on other sources like wars, ideology, what politics. And the beauty of these stories is that they are local, and they speak from the very heart of the Vietnamese people. So they're people centric. And when we are reading these stories, we are almost drawn into the culture, the folk traditions of Vietnam. And I would also like to say that these stories show how legend can become history, not history in the sense of what would I say, a factual history, but history in the sense of remembered, worshipped, and sort of emotionally lived by the people. So if it's something like this, then it really needs a literature person like Professor Henry to decode these stories and make them useful to us historians in a manner which will be greatly appreciated by the whole world. I'm sure it's watching us. And my question to you, Professor Henry, I have two questions out of these three stories which I have read. And for the first question is, what do you think? What role did these women warriors, queens, play in Vietnamese history? Because one of the stories mentions the Trung sisters who have of the Trung dynasty, and the story is called the story of two pure and efficacious ladies. So these two pure and efficacious ladies, how did they establish their own kingdom, local kingdom, Vietnamese in the North Vietnam? So what was the role of these women warriors and women rulers in Vietnamese history? That's number one. My second question to you, Professor Henry, is was the use of the supernatural in these stories always have this, especially there's a story of the dragon's claw, which is the third story, and how the king who has embedded a dragon's claw in his headgear, how he's able to become invincible and he defeats all the conquerors who come in front of him, all the Chinese he is able to defeat. So I would like to know whether this use of the supernatural is used in a manner to legitimize the rule of the local Vietnamese rulers who have just gained power. So is it to legitimize their rule that this supernatural has been used? And those are my two questions, Professor Henry. Thank you.
Well, in response, I would say that in Vietnam's traditional centuries, people who were active, are powerful, made a mark in life, are assumed to be still powerful after their deaths. And there seems to have been a great deal of unanimity and mutual understanding between highly placed people and common people in Vietnam. They, both the higher ups and the common people seem to agree that good results can be obtained by building temples and engaging in rituals of worship and homage towards the spirits of the departed. It seems to me to be true that if you trace any culture back in time sufficiently far, you will arrive at a culture in which inheritance and lineage is determined by who your mothers were and the mothers of those mothers and so on. People refer to this as the matriarchal stage of human development. I believe this is true both of China and of Vietnam. But it seems that in Vietnam, the matriarchal stage lasted longer, and it lasted almost into historical times. And there were traces of matriarchal beliefs and practices, even in the earliest accounts of Vietnam made by the Chinese. So the Trung sisters rebelled. They led armies. They successfully drove away their Chinese overlords, and they established a capital at Mê Linh. And Trung Trác, the elder sister, adopted the title Vương, which means king or emperor. And it seems that at that time nobody questioned this. I mean, to this day, Vietnamese women seem to enjoy greater autonomy, more decision-making power than their Chinese counterparts. Of course, they complain a great deal about being treated as second-class human beings, but the reason they do that, all that complaining, is that they are free to do the complaining. The Chinese women do not seem to enjoy this freedom, and they never complain about mistreatment. What strikes me in reading these stories is the high degree of agreement between upper class and lower class people in traditional Vietnam about the efficacy of powerful spirits. I don't know if that answers your questions, but that's what occurs to me. I'm not hearing you, ma'am.
Sorry. Thank you very much, Professor. I'm satisfied with your answers. Thank you.
I think you raised a marvelous question, Swati, and I think Professor pointed us back again to the cultural imagination, which you spoke about. So it was a nice circle there. Um, Swati Chatterjee, building Buddhist adepts.
Swati Mukherjee, Julie.
Sorry, darling. Swati Mukherjee. Were you a Chatterjee before?
Yes, I was. Yes.
I keep going back to your maiden name. I'm
Yes.
sorry. Yes, go ahead, please. Let's talk about your building Buddhist adepts.
Right. Hello, Professor, and everybody present here. I'd just like to go over this section which I have read and share my views with everybody very briefly. I really enjoyed going over this portion, Buddhist adepts with supernatural powers. It contains three very fascinating stories, and they made an impact upon me for various reasons, which I'd like to share here. For instance, this figure of Tu Dao Han, he begins his journey using black magic and sorcery because he wants to avenge his father's murder. Right. So this reminded me of the Senecan revenge tragedies that we have been teaching our students for many years. But from this, there was this very great transition to this kind of Buddhist pure heart doctrine, which I came to know from my reading of this section of your this section of the story, which was really fascinating, sir. And this enhances his magical abilities to such an extent that later it orchestrates his royal reincarnation. Right. So after this, another point which I would like to share is that the first two stories, they are speaking about legendary male monks, and these are figures, these were local figures, historical figures, who have been later deified as patron saints, and some of them even have temples in the Hanoi area and Red River Delta. So this transition of human figures to semi-divine figures, this was also something which I really liked, and I found it quite unusual. And sir, that your selection of the third story, which I admired, it was more or less, as we discussed just now with the other eminent speakers, that it was more or less a patriarchal society, etc. But that this choice of the story about this, the story of the nun, the saintly nun, right? So you have selected and put it in this category, which I liked a great deal, because that means that the female figure is equally adept at channelizing these metaphysical energies, the spiritual enlightenment, as her male counterparts. Because in those days, sir, I mean, we are going back to 14th century Vietnam, if I've read correctly. In those days, these women were, which were bound by the three obediences, that a woman is answerable to her father, her husband, and son at different phases of her life. But this lady, this nun, she bypasses all this. For her, it is like pure meditation. She does not fall into any of these categories. She subverts the traditional norms. So these were things I really liked. So, sir, my question to you, or rather, I would like to know a little bit more about this, that this supernatural power, is it only related to, sir, spiritualism? Because these were basically monks who were using this, or could it be that anybody could practice this magic? Like these, because the stories from the part I have read, I'm just talking of that section, that we are seeing that these are monks, these are saints, they are part of the Buddhist pure heart doctrine. So these are the facts, that they had a lot of power over the royal family of the Lead dynasty and the Tang dynasty. So does it mean that these powers were practiced only by the spiritual clergy, or was it just like, a mental advanced technology could be used by anybody? I mean, from your reading, sir, if you could please enlighten me.
Well, I would tend to say that the study and mastery of magical power is tends to be specific to religious figures and Buddhists. It seems to me that in present-day Vietnam, Buddhism is much more of a living thing than it is in China. I have known countless Vietnamese people who try very hard to live their lives according to Buddhist principles. I've traveled a lot in China too, and maybe there are such people in China. I don't know. I have not met them. I was interested that you noticed that the story of the Dao Hein begins with a figure who uses black magic to avenge his father. It seems to me, though, that the magic that he uses is not presented as being black or evil in the story. It's the tale is just narrated as if it were entirely normal for a person to use any means that he could find to kill the person who murdered his father. There's a Chinese saying, it is impossible to live beneath the same heaven as one who has murdered your father. And in fact, perhaps that is one of the rare Confucian elements that you can see in this collection of stories. I think that I think what you see a lot in these stories of Buddhist adepts are the poems. They could be called gathas, short four-line poems that summarize.
Yes, I think we are familiar with gathas, right?
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yes.
Right. I was not very aware of this poetic form until I translated the stories in Chitkwai. But they do seem prominent as a way of crystallizing Buddhist invitations, Buddhist quests for this and that.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay, we have Anju. Anju, listening to you would be a pleasure. And this is on sagas with multiple episodes. And what you thought, and then, of course, your question to Professor Henry.
Yes, of course. We are not going to leave the professor. Hello, professor. And it's so good to see you here amidst all of us. And it feels very good to be talking about a book which was, I mean, I read my portion was book 6, and it was great. It was very overwhelming. And it resonated a lot with Indian mythology, Buddhist philosophy, supernaturalism, which the Indians, like revel in, magic, and animism. So it was like reading something which probably originates from home itself, So it was quite interesting. I was also a little confused. It led to a kind of a confusion. Um, Vietnam, in order to break free from the northern dominance and years of rule of the Chinese dynasty, they wanted to save its culture and identity, right? So half the time I thought it's an identity crisis. I realized that poor things, they are really, battling a lot of problems and they are trying to maintain their identity. But on deeper analysis, I realized that it's not an identity crisis. They are putting up a very strong defense to safeguard their identity, and they're very clever. They took the colonizers' tools by way of their culture, their stories, and they made it work to their advantage, So I would actually call it the cultural weaponization. They very cleverly used their tales, their stories, their myths, their folklores, whatever, and they localized the whole thing. And they made full and proper advantage of whatever they wanted to get rid of, which was very good. My question to you, Professor, is despite, having adjusted and settled and maintaining a very strong identity of their own, do you think a little bit of Vietnamese identity was lost in this compromise? Or did they emerge as a much stronger entity?
Well, much the same thing could be said about Vietnam's response to Western colonial domination in the 19th and 20th centuries. The history of Vietnam in the latter part of the 19th and the first part of the 20th century is just continuous acts of rebellion against the French, and these the French were well. First of all, they devoutly hoped that the Vietnamese would stop speaking Vietnamese and start speaking French, and they thought one way to achieve this would be, first of all, to have all Vietnamese youngsters learn how to write their own language with Western letters. A system for doing this already existed, but it was used only by Christian communities. They thought, okay, in elementary school, they can at least become familiar with the Western alphabet using this system. And then when they get to high school, then we can start teaching them French, which will be easy because they already know the letters. And then when they go to the university, then everything will take place in French. So that was the policy of the French, starting from about 1900 in round numbers. But it did not work out the way the French expected. The introduction of this new system for writing Vietnamese gave a tremendous boost, not to French, but to Vietnamese studies.
Yeah, right.
So that was an example of the Vietnamese learning new techniques from the conquerors, and then using those techniques to throw off the conqueror.
Right. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Anju, that was a swell question. And I think in all our readings of post-colonial theory, what Prof. Henry has just talked about comes true. It's that you use their language. Derek Walcott is somebody who said, we'll use your language to talk back to you, right?
Yes. I mean, before that new policy begun by the French, the only way a Vietnamese could write his own language was to use an altered form of Chinese characters. And this system was impossible to use without a thorough knowledge of Chinese. And then it took several more years of study to learn how to use sinographic characters to write the Chinese. But with the new Western letter spelling system, 2 or 3 months of hard work was sufficient to master the system.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
If we can move on, Harish, would you like to talk about book 7? Because we've really
Yes.
marked timelines. Keep it short, dear.
Yes. So, Professor Henry, I'm looking at book 7, which you and I worked for a long time on this entire 41 stories. It was a delight editing them and working with you day after day. And then you got the lovely visuals done by Van Newen. We must pay adequate homage and tribute to him. So in book 7, you have the southern generals winning their battles against the Song, the Chinese dynasty. But they're winning them with the help of supernatural forces. Now, are these did these storytellers create a mythical, supernatural, fictitious narrative? Do you think? And then, secondly, has the Vietnamese government of the day used these stories as a patriotic device that, our history of resisting the Northerners goes back quite a ways? Thank you.
Yeah, well, nowadays in Vietnam, there is a lot of retrospective exuberance about the persistence and development of Vietnamese culture throughout the 1,000 years of Chinese domination. I think one of you asked the question, was anything lost this 1,000 years? In fact, I have a Vietnamese friend who wrote a book which addresses the question, how did the Vietnamese preserve a feeling of nationhood, even after 1,000 years of being administered by Chinese domination? And I think I can only say that the more they were dominated and controlled by the Chinese, the more un-Chinese they felt. And I cannot give an explanation. Well, perhaps in European terms, you could think of Poland. Poland ceased to exist on the map for well over 100 years, but they never lost this strong feeling of nationhood, of individuality. And sometimes when you are stripped of your identity, it can be a powerful force enabling you to strengthen your sense of identity. In general, I think in traditional times, the Vietnamese always felt that it was important to gain and maintain supernatural backing and support in order to win victories. And there are many very remarkable Vietnamese victories over apparently superior enemy forces that seemed to prove that this assumption was correct.
I think that's a marvelous conversation. Thank you so much, both of you. And now on to the last hurrah, and she is a writer, a poet, as many of us are on this collection of panelists today, Prof. But Swati is also a dabbler in haiku and haibun, so she knows how different languages of the East are structured.
Swarupa.
Swarupa, are you there? Hi,
I'm
Swarupa.
hi, I'm here. Thank you, Julie. I'm Swarupa.
Wow.
Hello.
You do.
Hello.
I have so many Swatis that I'm sorry I fall into that trap. Swarupa, apologies.
It's fine. Good evening to all of you, and good morning to Professor Henry. I, I was just overwhelmed when I read all these stories, and I think it brings a new world into focus for me. And thank you so much, Harish and Julie, for bringing this into my purview. I'm really fascinated by this, and I think I'm going to go on exploring this sort of world which has been created for me. And now that I'm retired, I guess I can. So, uh, my section is the chapter 8, which is the origins of names and customs. And in these Vietnamese legends, they show how deeply food is behind the spirituality, ancestry, and cultural identity in Vietnam. These explain the sacred origins of foods and rituals, and we may consider them etiological myths. The first story is about the legend of the beetle vine and the areca nut. And here in India, we are familiar with the concept of beetle leaves too, taking beetle nuts and beetle vines and areca nuts. And here in your story, two brothers and his wife transform into the areca tree, limestone boulder, and the beetle vine. And this happens sort of through magic. They throw themselves on the ground and they are transformed into that. And then they are eventually the king has some of that betel nut, and it becomes a custom to have betel nuts. He orders that they should be chewed before any marriage or any traditional uh, festival or something. And it became a symbol of loyalty and familial devotion. Then there is the legend of the rice cakes, in which uh, the Prince Lang Liu, he created the Banchang and Bangze.
Pension?
Square and round rice cakes, which represented heaven and earth, and they were also given as offerings to ancestors. And then there is in the legend of the watermelon, water. Eventually, there is a very interesting story, but watermelon eventually is given as offerings to gods for ancestral rituals. So, uh, my question is that would you consider these legends primarily as etiological myths, or do they belong to a broader category of cultural memory and identity? And also, are these legends still actually present in contemporary Vietnamese cultural consciousness, especially amongst the younger generations?
Yeah, I think they are still present, and the use of the Areca palm and beetle vines and limestone. I think this exists. Well, as you said, it is known in India and also in southern China. You can
Mhm.
find that also, and I believe in Indonesia as well. And the use of this beetle mixture, beetle nut masticant, is. I mean, it has worked its way into Vietnamese marital customs, nuptial agreements between one family and another, and also just village meetings or councils. You cannot have a proper meeting unless it begins with all of the participants chewing betel. And so, hmm, um, yeah, I think, the many stories in this collection continue to exert power in present day Vietnam. This is not part of the book 8, but one of the stories concerns a Cham princess after her husband, the Cham king, is killed in battle, is taken captive by the Vietnamese, and in order to avoid being dishonored by her Vietnamese captors, she throws herself into the ocean and dies. And she has a temple in Vietnam. It's not far from Hanoi, and you can still go to it. And in fact, there is some government committee or an entity that for a while established their headquarters either in the temple or next to it, but they decided that the spirit of the lady was too powerful, and they had to go somewhere else. Um, um, yeah, I think. Yeah, and oftentimes when I have gone to Vietnam, people have offered me betel. When you chew it, it turns your saliva bright red, and after a number of decades of chewing it regularly, it causes your teeth to become jet black. And however, your teeth also become less vulnerable to decay. And in fact, one of my good friends, the documentary film director Trần Văn Thủy, his mother, whom I met, had those jet black teeth. It's considered a mark of beauty in traditional times in Vietnam. But I think in the 1920s, the black teeth ceased to be popular, and young women began going to dentists to get their teeth scraped so they would not be black anymore. But they would keep this a secret from their parents. And, they would stop smiling or laughing so to hide their white teeth.
That's
So,
interesting.
all of these legends and feelings, they're known to everybody. They continue to exert influence.
That's interesting. Thank you, Professor.
I think, Swarupa, what you've registered for all of us is that
Mm.
many of the stories have rituals in them, have practices in them, just as most cultures do, which are still ongoing and still a part of our, a part of our lived experience every day. And maybe we don't think about it because we are doing it all the time. So thank you, Professor Henry. I have a very short little remark to make here, and that is, am I getting the name right, Professor? I remember going to see a beautiful charm temple of the 1530s in, was it Nachang?
Yeah, mm-hmm.
Nachang, and the famous face of that princess that you talk about is almost like a as they explain, this is about, I think, a good 20 years ago, as I was saying. And she is there. It's almost like a mascot of the charm sculptures. So, yeah, I mean, very few of us know here. Maybe some who've looked into the legends, like Madhulika's just been there and come back. Um, that was the Hindu and the Islamic influence on the eastern, northeastern part of what we now know as Vietnam. Am I right, Prof?
Well, I think the temple you speak of in Nha Trang, it is devoted to a charm deity. I think I've never associated it before with this charm heroine who leapt into the ocean, but I think I've heard the name Po Nagar as the name of the
Yes.
charm deity worshipped in that temple.
Thank you so much. I think we still have Orko, who's very much a part of Rising Asia. Orko, are you there? I think you are.
And I think we might have Amit Jha is here too,
Yes,
and
yes, yes, yes. Amit is here. So Orko, go ahead, fire your question, and then I think Amit, you can take the floor. Go ahead.
Hi, Professor Henry. Hi, Julie, ma'am, and Harish,
Hi.
sir. I was just interested to hear all the different perspectives and hear about the connection with ancient Vietnam with the different countries across the continent. As such, I didn't really have a question today. I was just here. I wanted to listen to everything that was being said. But thank you for the discussion. It was very informative. And if Mr. Jha has a question, he could continue.
Thank you so much, Arko.
Yeah.
Hello, Amit. Go right ahead.
Okay, Professor. Uh, I come, Professor Henry, first of all, greetings and congratulations for a brilliant achievement that you have done in translating these ancient Chinese works. Because as I see, you did your PhD in Chinese literature, but I don't know whether your PhD would have equipped you to learn ancient Chinese, because I mean, all Chinese need not be ancient Chinese. So, and trying to translate something, I don't know whether you had to do more than what your PhD equipped you for. But anyway, whatever you did is stupendous. Now, I come from a world of public policy. I retired from the government. So, I would take you to a slightly different area, although I'm a lover of literature and history. Uh, I was growing up, in my growing up years, the Vietnam War was going on. That was a big international event which stretched on and on. And when I was young, and by the time I was 10 or 12, between 65 and 73, the war was at its height. Now, I can't resist seeing your background in the US Army. That is from 68 to 71, you were in the US Army, and 1 year tour of duty in Vietnam during 70 71. Now, 70 71 would be the height of Vietnam War. So, just as a matter of kind of detail, I was interested in knowing whether you were in action, because I'm quite sure that every American at that time would either be for or against the war. So it was something which impinged on the consciousness of the Americans a bit too much, as we have all seen through countless works of literature, poetry, films. Very, very great films have been made on the whole episode of the Vietnam War. Now, what was your, I mean, in this context, what was your perspective or aim in translating these works in Chinese about Vietnam, about Vietnamese society? Was it pure scholarly meandering that you came to, do this thing about Vietnam, or did it have, or it was purely scholarly achievement, or did it have some links? And I suppose it should have with your experience of Vietnam. Thank you.
Yes. Well, the year that I spent in Vietnam, I was there for 12 months from the summer of 1970 to the summer of 1971. And that year was the richest year that I had ever experienced up to that time. I mean, before being immersed in the culture, it had never occurred to me that a culture could be governed by ritual and ethics and tradition, as opposed to power and politics, wealth, and so on. And so Vietnam was my introduction to Asia. After Vietnam, I began becoming familiar with China also. You asked if I was ever in action. Well, yeah, on one occasion I was in the middle of a firefight in the jungle, and it became necessary to call in a helicopter to rescue a wounded person, and that was followed by when the helicopter dropped an enormous bomb on the area. But usually I did not have such experiences. I served in the army as an interpreter and interrogator. So I had long conversations with people who had defected from the North Vietnamese army. The American army called them ralliers, Tiu Hoi in Vietnamese. And but what was really distinctive about it was friends I made there, long conversations I had with them. And once I was able to rescue a person in the army of the Republic of Vietnam because his Jeep broke down somewhere, and he knew that if he could not move back to his base when night came, he would be captured by the Viet Cong. So we attached a chain that connected the front bumper of his vehicle to the rear bumper of my vehicle. It was a short chain, so I had to drive very carefully, but I managed to get him and his Jeep back to the base camp. And then he invited me in for tea, and I met his wife, and it was all very pleasant. So, well, I don't know. I certainly did not want, I never wanted to be a part of that war. I was, as a young man, I was a sort of late developing person, and when I was earning my living as a musician, and but after a few years of that, I began to get a bit bored with my work, and so purely for purposes of diversion, I started taking some college courses at a local community college. And then after that, for no reason except to avoid being drafted, I applied to a four-year institution and was accepted there in Amherst College. But my plan for avoiding the war did not work because by then I was more than 24 years old, and so I could no longer use college study as an excuse not to go into the army. So it became obvious that if I did nothing, I would be drafted, and that would mean that I would either be in infantry or artillery. And I felt that I did not have a strong vocation for either one. So I decided to enlist in the army. That allows you to choose your army school. So I enlisted for language training. It meant that I would have to be in the army for 3 years instead of 2 years, but it seemed worth it. So I did that, and so I was the army. I was enrolled in an army language school in Vietnamese for 12 months, and so that was the origin of my involvement with Asia. I like to say to people that everything that I do, say, feel, or think was determined back in 1968 by the United States government.
Thank you, Professor. It was, I mean, one can't be both a lover of literature and a lover of war, and you just said it. And that really confirms my belief in people of literature. Julie, are you listening? Thank you. Thank you very much.
Amit, I must say, you're the icing on the cake. I think most of us would agree. The question you put forward to Professor Henry, I will remember for a very long time. It's a bit of an emotional moment for me because really, war and literature. Swarupa, you're editing a book of poems
Yes.
just on that subject, and this is very close to my heart what you and Professor Henry have been talking about. Thank you so very much for this evening, all of you, all of you. Thank you, Amit. Thank you, Professor.
It has been a great honor and pleasure to participate. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Professor Henry, for coming and spending so much time. And we will be back in touch very soon. I wish you a good morning and thank you once again. And I hope Joan is doing very well.
She seems to be doing fine. Thank you, Harish.
All our love. Thank you so much. Thank you again, everyone. I'll be in touch over the weekend. We have some good news for all of us. Goodbye.
Bye.
Harish, thank you so much for giving us this gift of Professor Henry.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.